Before the city wakes, before the grand marble halls echo with the day's first voices, life is already stirring in the shadows. Long before the sun even hints at rising, a Roman slave opens their eyes on a cold stone floor. They know this day will be just like the last, and the one before that. There are no grand battles to witness, no powerful speeches to overhear, no history-making events. There are only footsteps, routine, and quiet endurance. This isn't a story of rebellion or high drama. It's a story of the slow passing of hours, of hands repeating the same familiar motions, and of a life shaped entirely by patience, not by choice. This is the silent, unnoticed rhythm of ordinary existence, where history didn't shout its presence, but simply breathed softly, one quiet day at a time. Most people imagine Roman slaves only as faceless laborers, shouting under the whip or toiling endlessly in harsh heat. But their lives were not only pain and punishment. Life moved slowly, measured by hours, tasks, and small rhythms that repeated quietly each day. For thousands of people across the empire, slavery was a persistent pattern of survival, routine, and tiny moments of calm within obligations. The sun rose, bread was prepared, pots were washed, water fetched, orders received and carried out, and in the midst of these motions, there was the quiet endurance that defined daily existence. A Roman slave's morning often began before dawn. The household stirred with soft noise, the clatter of cooking utensils, the faint stirring of the family, and the distant footsteps of others beginning their day. Slaves rose to carry out tasks, moving without complaint because these routines shaped every measure of their lives. Some were assigned to the kitchen, others to the garden, some to the stable or the workshop. Each role was repetitive, each step familiar, each day similar to the one before. In this repetition, there was a rhythm, a predictable order that provided a form of structure in lives largely controlled by others. Meals were prepared methodically. Grain was ground into flour, water drawn from wells, vegetables washed, and fire carefully tended. Each step required attention, but also offered small moments to notice the world. The sound of water flowing, the smell of baking bread, the gentle warmth of fire. These details were often the only sensory comfort in an otherwise rigid day. Slaves were expected to work quietly, efficiently, without drawing attention. Their presence was constant, necessary, yet rarely acknowledged. Some slaves were tasked with the care of children. In these quiet moments, they moved slowly, rocking an infant or carrying a child from one room to another. There was an intimacy in this labor, a rhythm of touch and repetition, punctuated only by the soft breathing of a child. This work, while demanding, offered a space in which time seemed to pass differently, measured not by authority, but by the small cycles of life they observed directly. In the fields or workshops, the sun marked the passing hours. Slaves plowed, planted, or harvested, hands moving steadily over soil, repeating motions learned from months and years of practice. Work was not always punishing, but it was relentless in its constancy. Tools struck the earth, brushes swept surfaces, and hands shaped clay or metal. Every gesture was familiar, every task repeated. In this consistency, life unfolded slowly, almost meditative, as the mind adjusted to the rhythm of work. Evening brought minor relief. Food was distributed. The day's labors ended. Slaves washed, sometimes gathered in quiet corners, or shared small, wordless gestures of camaraderie. These were moments of pause, brief reprieves in the measured cadence of obligations. Sleep was welcomed as a release from responsibility, a time when the body could rest and the mind drift without oversight. Yet, even in rest, life's structure persisted. Tasks awaited in the morning, and the cycle would repeat with the sun's rise. Slaves' lives were also shaped by hierarchy and household structure. Each task, each order, was defined by authority. Some slaves supervised others, carrying the burden of responsibility quietly. Others were strictly subordinate, performing their roles precisely, knowing any misstep might invite reprimand. Within this hierarchy, slaves learned the rhythm of obedience, patience, and subtle communication. In quiet endurance, they navigated both labor and hierarchy, moving through daily life with a steady, practiced calm. Despite restrictions, small acts of agency existed. A moment spent observing the sky, a careful choice in arranging utensils, a whispered joke or glance between companions. These gestures were unnoticed by authority, but meaningful to those who shared them. They became small threads of life's texture, subtle signs of continuity, resilience, and quiet humanity. Time moved slowly, but within its repetition, life persisted. Slaves also witnessed life beyond their own labor. Families conversed, children played, and markets bustled nearby. These observations offered perspective, a window into another rhythm of existence. Slaves learned patience, watching cycles unfold that were not entirely their own, learning to move within the margins of control while noting the constancy of the world around them. Even under compulsion, life had measurable patterns. At night, after tasks ended and food was eaten, many slaves gathered quietly. Some slept in shared rooms, others on mats in less formal spaces. Sleep was not luxurious, but it was essential. Bodies rested while minds reflected, occasionally wandering to thoughts of family, freedom, or distant lands. Dreams were often short, fragmented, but they offered small escapes from the measured predictability of daytime labor. Night and rest provided a rare, unobserved space within the daily cycle. In this slow rhythm, life continued, day after day. Sunlight, work, meals, rest, and sleep, each acted as a marker, defining existence in ways that were calm, repetitive, and enduring. The life of a Roman slave was neither fleeting nor chaotic. It moved with a quiet persistence, measured by ordinary acts and small patterns of attention, endurance, and subtle observation. Time passed slowly, almost meditatively, even as authority shaped every choice, every motion, and every breath. And so, life continued, quietly and steadily. Slaves rose, labored, ate, observed, rested, and slept. Generations repeated these rhythms. Hours stretched gently, and days moved in calm succession. In this steady, unremarkable pattern, the daily life of a Roman slave unfolded, slow, enduring, and quietly persistent, offering its own form of rhythm, continuity, and unnoticed humanity within the vast machinery of empire. The day of a Roman slave was defined by routine, repetition, and quiet observation. Each morning, tasks were assigned with precision. In the kitchens, slaves moved like a single organism, drawing water from clay jars, grinding grain into flour, kneading dough, and stoking fires. The smell of bread baking mingled with the scent of herbs and simmering stews. Every movement was practiced, honed over months or years. There was no rush, only rhythm. Each action flowed into the next, creating a slow, deliberate pace that guided the entire household. Some slaves worked in workshops. They shaped clay into pots, wove baskets, carved wood, or hammered metal. Hands moved in repeated motions, guided by skill and habit. These tasks were physically demanding but predictable. Day by day, motions became meditative. Observing their own movements, slaves became attuned to subtle patterns, the bend of a wrist, the angle of a blade, the rhythm of hammer on metal. In repetition, life was measured not in grand events, but in small, constant actions that marked time and purpose. Slaves in stables tended animals. They fed, brushed, and guided horses, donkeys, and sometimes cattle. The quiet lowing of animals and the warmth of their bodies became part of the rhythm of life. Mornings began with the sound of hooves, evenings ended with the closing of stable doors. These moments offered predictability. Animals did not speak, they did not judge, they simply existed, sharing slow, consistent patterns of movement with the humans who cared for them. In these rhythms, the day passed gently. Even minor tasks were repeated with attention. Sweeping courtyards, filling lamps with oil, cleaning utensils. These acts were simple yet grounding. Each movement, however mundane, offered a sense of control over a small portion of life. Slaves developed a quiet mindfulness. The touch of water, the texture of grain, the warmth of fire became points of observation, markers in the slow passage of time. Repetition shaped not only work, but awareness. Some slaves attended to children, carrying infants, helping with washing, or guiding toddlers through the courtyard, provided intermittent calm within a busy household. Children's breathing, small gestures, and soft movements were observed closely. Time passed differently in these moments. Life slowed further. For the slaves responsible for care, these hours were small respites from labor, moments in which connection replaced compulsion. Though tasks remained obligatory, there was space for tenderness, observation, and rhythm. The midday meal was another marker in the day. Slaves often ate small portions of food left from preparation for the household. Bread, olives, and water provided sustenance. Eating was quick but essential, allowing energy to continue the day's labor. Even in these brief moments, there was quiet. sitting together, sharing space, perhaps exchanging subtle glances or whispered words. The slaves experienced small continuity in community. They existed together in repetition, reinforcing slow, steady bonds in the midst of structured labor. Afternoons often involved less visible work, but tasks were no less important. Cleaning storage rooms, moving supplies, mending clothing, or sweeping floors, all were carried out with calm attention. Slaves moved slowly and deliberately, attuned to the expectations of the household. Every motion had a purpose. Small mistakes were noted by overseers, but within these tasks, there was space for habit and familiarity to guide movement. The day unfolded predictably, providing structure that became its own form of quiet reassurance. Even brief personal moments existed within the day. A slave might pause for a drink of water, observe a distant scene in the courtyard, or notice the play of sunlight across walls. These small intervals of observation provided mental space, a rare opportunity for reflection. Though the majority of life was dictated by the household, these fleeting pauses reminded the living worker of continuity beyond immediate tasks. Time passed slowly, each small moment layering into the next. In the late afternoon, attention shifted toward closing and preparing for evening. Fires were banked or extinguished, utensils cleaned, spaces organized, lamps filled with oil, courtyards swept. The rhythm of preparation created calm. Even in these final hours, repetition marked progress. Each action flowed into the next, marking the passage of time through pattern and motion, rather than urgency or excitement. Slaves moved in quiet coordination, creating harmony from routine. When night arrived, the household settled. Tasks ceased. Slaves often gathered quietly, sometimes sitting on benches or mats. Conversations were soft, limited by custom, hierarchy, and space. Sleep was the ultimate relief, a pause from labor and observation. Night brought a different rhythm. Breathing slowed, bodies relaxed, minds wandered. Even here, life retained its subtle structure. Tasks awaited at dawn, but for now, stillness and rest prevailed. Through centuries, this daily rhythm shaped the experience of Roman slaves. Life was not defined by drama, but by slow, enduring continuity. Work, observation, care, and rest created a quiet persistence. Time was measured by bread baked, floors swept, water drawn, animals tended, and children guided. In these small, repeated acts, life unfolded with calm consistency, a rhythm that both constrained and defined existence. And so, day after day, morning to night, Roman slaves lived in quiet repetition. Their world was bounded by work and household structure. Yet within these bounds, subtle observation, fleeting tenderness, and meditative repetition offered a slow, enduring pulse. Life continued, steadily and predictably, until the sun rose again to mark the next day, beginning the familiar rhythm once more. Even within the strict patterns of labor, Roman slaves experienced small moments that were uniquely their own. These were rarely recorded in grand histories, but they defined the quiet texture of daily life. A glance shared between companions, the careful arrangement of tools, or a whispered word in the corner of a courtyard offered subtle agency. Though freedom was limited, these tiny acts allowed control over the immediate environment. In repetition and observation, life carried a rhythm of calm endurance, in which even minimal choices became meaningful markers of time and self. Some slaves cared for animals, tending them with gentle attention. The rhythm of feeding, brushing, and guiding creatures through the courtyard created a predictable, meditative sequence. Animals responded to familiarity, recognizing hands, sounds, and patterns. For the slave, these interactions were stabilizing. They provided a sense of continuity and competence within an otherwise controlled world. Observing the slow passage of days through the cycles of care reinforced the subtle, enduring rhythm that governed life. In workshops, hands worked over clay, wood, or metal, with repetition that became almost meditative. Each strike of the hammer, each sweep of the brush, each coil of pottery was learned through time and experience. Within this repetition, there was room for quiet observation. Slaves noted small details in their work, adjusted motions for efficiency, and occasionally improvised small improvements. These acts were unnoticed by overseers, but they offered the satisfaction of competence and subtle influence over the immediate world. Meals were modest, but they also provided rhythm. Bread, olives, and water, often shared among companions, marked the midpoint of the day. Eating was a time for pause, brief conversation, and observation. Slaves noted the weather, the movements of household members, and the passing of shadows across courtyards. Even small gestures, offering an extra piece of bread, sharing a smile, became threads of connection. These moments reinforced bonds, created patterns of quiet companionship, and offered a sense of small agency within daily life. Children in the household provided another dimension. Slaves who guided, carried, or cared for them found rhythm in these interactions. Lullabies, gentle rocking, and shared observation of a child's movements brought calm and continuity. Time slowed in these moments. The child's breathing, soft sighs, or reaching hands created a meditative awareness. For the caregiver, the world contracted to the immediate cycle of attention and care, offering both responsibility and comfort within the broader structure of the household. Slaves also observed life beyond their own labor. Markets, visitors, and distant sounds carried fragments of another world. Watching the activities of others, noting changes in the household, or observing patterns in the weather offered awareness beyond immediate tasks. These observations, though quiet and subtle, created a sense of understanding and anticipation. Time was measured not only in labor, but in the careful observation of patterns that repeated day after day. Even small personal rituals existed. A slave might arrange a workspace precisely, sweep a corner with care, or pause to take in sunlight filtering through a window. These gestures were unnoticed by overseers, yet they reinforced a sense of order and calm. Each act created a rhythm within the day, a slow unfolding of control and stability. In repetition, life carried both obligation and subtle relief, a gentle, enduring balance between labor and mindfulness. Evening brought a natural decrescendo in activity. Tasks were completed, tools stored, and fires banked. The household quieted. Slaves gathered in corners, on benches, or mats, resting bodies and minds. Conversations were soft, brief, and unobtrusive. Sleep arrived gradually, offering the only space in which bodies could fully relax and minds could wander. In this nightly pause, the rhythm of the day dissolved, leaving room for reflection, dreams, and calm endurance. Within these nightly moments, small freedoms and subtle agency persisted. Slaves thought of family members, distant homes, or personal aspirations. Dreams carried fragments of life outside immediate control. Sleep became a sanctuary, a place where the mind could drift quietly, reviewing patterns, relationships, and sequences of labor. Night and rest provided a slow, gentle closure to the day's routine, preparing the body and spirit for repetition with the sunrise. Through these daily rhythms, lives persisted in quiet continuity. Work, observation, care, and subtle personal acts wove together to create a slow, measured passage of time. Each day unfolded similarly to the last, yet the repetition offered its own rhythm and calm. The small moments of attention, reflection, and agency created texture within routine, transforming the unremarkable patterns of labor into enduring experiences of resilience and continuity. And so, life for Roman slaves moved with quiet, steady persistence. Each day was marked by work, observation, and small gestures of care. Evening and sleep offered relief, reflection, and a subtle sense of control. In repetition and endurance, the pulse of daily life flowed slowly, almost meditatively, revealing the human capacity to adapt, observe, and maintain continuity, even within rigid structures of authority. Time passed steadily, quietly, and without urgency, as the world continued its gentle rhythm around them. Even within the strict routines of labor, Roman slaves found small ways to make life their own. These moments were quiet and often unnoticed, but they mattered deeply. A carefully placed utensil, a brush of straw woven into a basket, or a brief pause to observe sunlight on a wall allowed a sense of control in a world largely dictated by others. Repetition of work created rhythm, and within that rhythm, the smallest choices became meaningful, quietly shaping the day and preserving a sense of self. Some slaves found comfort in observation, watching the household from a distance, noticing the shifts of light across a courtyard, or observing the gestures of family members offered subtle reassurance. These observations were meditative, providing awareness without interruption. Time moved slowly in these acts. The body labored, but the mind drifted gently across familiar landscapes, finding stability and continuity in small, repeated patterns. Personal thoughts were carefully nurtured in quiet moments. Slaves reflected on the past, imagined the future, or recalled memories of distant homes. These thoughts were private, often unspoken, forming an inner life that remained untouched by authority. Even a few minutes of reflection provided solace, a gentle reprieve from obligations. In this way, private moments became acts of endurance, preserving identity and awareness within the structured rhythm of daily work. Small rituals emerged naturally: a brush of hands over a clean surface, a gentle arrangement of personal space, or a mindful approach to a task created order and calm. These gestures reinforced attention and care, quietly shaping the environment and sustaining a sense of mastery over immediate surroundings. Within repetition, these tiny acts became meditative, allowing focus and presence despite constraints. Life moved slowly, and even small motions carried significance. Evenings offered further subtle freedoms. After work, slaves gathered in corners or quiet rooms, speaking softly or sharing wordless gestures. Conversation was measured, deliberate, and meaningful in its restraint. A nod, a glance, a shared smile, each conveyed solidarity, comfort, or recognition. These moments were fleeting but grounding, creating calm connections and reinforcing the rhythm of daily life. Sleep approached gradually, offering the only fully private space for reflection and respite. Sleep itself became a sanctuary. Mats were laid, lamps flickered softly, and the household settled into quiet. Breathing slowed, thoughts drifted. In dreams, slaves might imagine freedom, family, or distant places. Dreams carried fragments of a life outside immediate control, providing mental space for hope, reflection, and continuity. Rest allowed bodies to recover, minds to wander, and hearts to maintain a sense of calm in the measured cadence of daily life. Even minimal forms of resistance emerged in quiet ways. A slight adjustment to work, a careful decision to prioritize certain tasks, or a discreet rearrangement of objects allowed subtle autonomy. These actions were small, almost imperceptible, yet they reinforced identity, agency, and personal rhythm. In repetition, these subtle choices created a slow, steady assertion of control, blending seamlessly with the daily structure of labor and household life. Life continued in a slow, steady pattern. Morning work, midday meals, afternoon labor, evening reflection, and nightly sleep created predictable rhythms. Within these cycles, moments of observation, reflection, and subtle personal action added depth and meaning. Repetition shaped both body and mind, allowing endurance, presence, and quiet resilience to flourish. The passage of time became a rhythm measured not by events, but by small, persistent patterns of life and work. Even in hardship, small comforts persisted. The warmth of the sun, the feel of straw beneath hands, the sound of distant laughter or animals, and the rhythm of repeated tasks provided stability. These ordinary moments grounded the day, offering continuity and calm. Each breath, each gesture, each pause contributed to a sense of presence and survival within a world largely controlled by others. And so, life for Roman slaves unfolded slowly. Work, observation, reflection, and subtle gestures intertwined to create a rhythm both constraining and sustaining. The day moved steadily from dawn to dusk, and night offered quiet respite. In this repetition, private thoughts, personal care, and subtle agency created a hidden continuity. Time passed predictably, gently, and without urgency, revealing the quiet endurance and meditative pace of daily life under conditions both demanding and profoundly human. Even within the structured life of a Roman household, moments of connection arose between slaves. Work was often solitary, repetitive, and observed by overseers, yet small gestures created community. A nod of acknowledgement, a shared glance across a courtyard, or a whispered word during a quiet task formed invisible bonds. These connections were subtle but deeply meaningful, weaving a network of companionship that eased the monotony of labor and lent comfort to otherwise controlled existence. In these moments, time slowed, and the repetitive rhythm of daily work was punctuated by tiny flashes of understanding and solidarity. Shared meals offered another quiet form of interaction. Bread, olives, cheese, or simple water was often divided among companions. Eating together, even in silence, reinforced connection and trust. Conversations, when allowed, were soft and deliberate, limited to observations about the household, fleeting humor, or practical advice. These interactions provided a small sense of agency, a reminder that life was not solely dictated by orders. In these brief pauses, laughter might emerge, subtle jokes might be exchanged, and a momentary sense of freedom was experienced within the slow pulse of daily life. Slaves also observed each other's work, offering quiet guidance or correction. This form of teaching was subtle, often unacknowledged by overseers, but essential to maintaining skill and efficiency. A gesture, a carefully demonstrated motion, or an example of patience transmitted knowledge. These small exchanges created rhythm and continuity. Through shared effort, individuals reinforced each other's abilities, subtly shaping the household's functioning while sustaining calm interpersonal connections that softened the harsh edges of authority. Small joys persisted in the quietest moments. The warmth of the sun, the coolness of water drawn from a well, the texture of clay, or the subtle scent of fresh bread offered sensory relief. These ordinary details, though minor, were cherished. A hand brushing over smooth stone, a glance at a distant landscape, or the simple satisfaction of completing a repetitive task provided grounding and calm. Slaves learned to notice these subtleties, integrating them into the rhythm of the day to maintain endurance and quiet contentment. Coping strategies were often subtle, internal, and meditative. Mental games, counting repetitions, observing patterns in sunlight, or reflecting on distant memories helped pass time and retain a sense of self. These strategies required no attention from overseers and allowed slaves to preserve mental space. Within a controlled environment, the repetition of labor, once purely physical, became a framework for reflection, mindfulness, and quiet endurance. In the slow passage of the day, these small methods sustained both patience and calm. Occasionally, small acts of agency offered relief, adjusting the angle of a broom, pausing to wipe sweat from the brow, or arranging tools carefully provided minimal control over immediate surroundings. These gestures were almost invisible to authority but significant to the individual. They became a gentle assertion of identity, a way to maintain presence within an environment largely dictated by others. Repetition and subtlety transformed daily obligations into opportunities for mindfulness, persistence, and minor autonomy. Even brief moments of storytelling or memory sharing offered calm connection. Slaves might recount quiet memories from childhood, distant homes, or imagined experiences. These stories were soft, private, and shared selectively. They transported minds beyond the immediate constraints of labor, allowing imagination and reflection to intermingle with routine. In repetition and observation, these small stories created continuity, reinforcing identity and linking past, present, and future within the slow rhythm of daily life. Evening brought the natural close of the day. Tools were stored, spaces cleaned, and lamps lit. Tasks diminished gradually, and the household quieted. Slaves gathered in corners or shared mats, resting bodies and minds. Soft conversation continued briefly before sleep. In these moments, subtle interactions offered reassurance, solidarity, and a sense of continuity. Bonds created through work, observation, and shared survival carried into the calm of night, sustaining relationships and quiet resilience through darkness. Sleep was both release and continuity. Mats on stone floors, soft straw, or quiet corners provided physical rest. Dreams allowed imagination, reflection, and subtle escape. Night offered a gentle reset, allowing bodies to recover and minds to drift through the slow currents of thought. Even in sleep, the rhythm of daily life persisted. Dawn would bring repetition, labor, and subtle interaction anew. The cycle of quiet endurance was uninterrupted, measured in hours, gestures, and small acts of presence. Through centuries, this pattern of life persisted. Work, companionship, observation, and private strategies combined to create a slow, enduring rhythm. Each day offered repetition, subtle connection, and the occasional spark of minor joy. Life moved predictably, but within predictability lay calm, subtle resilience, and quiet continuity. Roman slaves lived slowly, steadily, and attentively. Their days marked, not by excitement, but by enduring persistence, small pleasures, and the gentle flow of time. And so, life continued. Sun rose, tasks began, connections formed, minor joys emerged, and sleep returned, the body to calm. Days followed days, years flowed gently, and the pulse of quiet endurance carried generation after generation through the slow, steady rhythm of life in the Roman household. As the sun began to descend, the pace of the household shifted subtly. Tasks that had seemed urgent during daylight became quieter, more deliberate. Floors were swept, tools put away, fires banked, and cooking utensils cleaned. Slaves moved in a rhythm defined by familiarity and repetition. Even the simplest motions carried significance. the careful placement of a pot, the gentle stacking of wood, the brushing of straw from a sleeping mat. Each gesture became a marker in the slow passage of the day, a small ritual of order and calm. Evening also offered a space for reflection. Slaves often paused briefly to notice details they had overlooked during the day, the angle of sunlight through a doorway, the soft echo of footsteps on stone, the distant hum of life beyond the household. These observations were meditative, grounding the mind in the present while allowing subtle thoughts to drift toward memory, family, or distant lands. Reflection became an internal rhythm, a quiet companion to the physical labor that defined their days. Food was consumed more leisurely in the evening. Slaves shared small portions among themselves, sometimes in silence, sometimes with soft conversation. Bread, olives, and water offered sustenance, but also comfort. Eating together created subtle bonds of trust and companionship. In these quiet moments, the constant weight of labor was momentarily softened by small, shared rituals. Conversation was low, deliberate, measured, yet meaningful, reinforcing the web of connection that sustained the household through repetition and endurance. As night deepened, preparation for rest became central. Mats were arranged carefully, lamps lit to cast a soft, steady glow, and sleeping spaces cleared of clutter. Slaves moved deliberately, aware that night was a transition from labor to calm. The physical exhaustion of the day was tempered by the steady rhythm of repetition. Time slowed, breathing became deep and measured. The household itself seemed to settle, wrapping the living in a quiet cocoon of stillness and routine. Sleep was more than physical rest. It was a space for private reflection, dreaming, and mental escape. Slaves closed their eyes on mats or benches, the warmth of stone or straw beneath them offering grounding. The mind wandered gently. Memories of family, imagined freedom, or distant homelands drifted in fragments. Even in dreams, the rhythm of life continued. Small gestures of care, daily repetition, and familiar sounds became intertwined with imagination, creating a slow, seamless flow from wakefulness to rest. Nighttime also allowed subtle observation and awareness. Slaves listened to distant sounds, the creaking of doors, the soft breathing of companions, the faint hum of the city beyond. These auditory cues created a quiet map of space and presence, reinforcing security, calm, and connection. Even in darkness, the household was alive with rhythm, and awareness of this pattern provided reassurance. Life moved slowly, even when bodies rested, and the passage of time was gently measured by sound, sensation, and memory. Private thoughts often accompanied these hours. Slaves considered the small details of the day, whether tasks were completed well, how companions fared, or what might be required of them tomorrow. Reflection was meditative. It reinforced endurance, patience, and a quiet sense of identity within the strictures of the household. Even when work demanded total obedience during daylight, night provided space for mental presence, subtle planning, and self-maintenance. In repetition, the mind retained its rhythm, mirroring the steady pulse of labor. Dreams, when they arrived, offered another layer of experience. They were brief, fragmented, sometimes comforting, sometimes reflective. Memories of home, imagined conversations, or distant landscapes surfaced. Sleep was both restorative and connective, linking the present to the past, and, occasionally, to imagined futures. Even dreams were structured by the slow rhythm of daily life. The repeated cycles of work, care, and observation shaped not only waking thought, but the inner life of the sleeping mind, creating continuity across hours, days, and nights. Subtle interactions persisted even at night. A glance at a companion, the soft rustle of a blanket, or a whispered word reinforced connection. These gestures were small, unnoticed by overseers, but deeply meaningful. They offered reassurance, solidarity, and human contact in a life otherwise defined by repetition and authority. In these quiet nocturnal interactions, bonds were strengthened, and the household became more than a site of labor, became a space of shared endurance and subtle companionship. Night passed slowly, measured by breathing, faint movement, and the gentle rhythms of the household. Slaves rested while remaining alert to subtle cues. Each hour carried both stillness and awareness. By morning, the cycle would repeat. Sunlight would return, tasks would resume, and the measured patterns of work and observation would continue. Yet the night left a quiet imprint. Bodies rested, minds wandered, and subtle resilience was preserved. Sleep became a gentle reinforcement of endurance, reflection, and continuity. Through centuries, these patterns repeated. Slaves moved through labor, observation, interaction, reflection, and rest in slow succession. The rhythm of the household, the cycles of work and sleep, and the small gestures of care and companionship created an enduring structure. Life moved predictably, gently, and persistently. Even within constraints, private reflection, dreams, and quiet interaction allowed resilience, subtle agency, and calm continuity to flourish. And so, night after night, Roman slaves rested, reflected, and dreamed. Sleep provided recovery, imagination, and reassurance. The household's quiet rhythms sustained them. Life continued steadily, slowly, and meditatively, guided by repetition, small gestures of care, and the enduring pulse of daily existence. Time moved gently, persistence endured, and in the calm of night, the quiet resilience of Roman slaves persisted, unseen but steady, within the slow cadence of life. Even in a life dominated by labor and authority, Roman slaves found ways to experience connection and community. Their social interactions were subtle, measured, and often unobserved, yet they provided essential support. In kitchens, workshops, and courtyards, slaves exchanged glances, shared brief words, or passed a small token of camaraderie. These tiny gestures formed a quiet network of companionship, reinforcing endurance and resilience. Life moved slowly, but in the repetition of daily tasks, these small social connections became steady threads of comfort and human presence. Shared work often deepened bonds. In workshops, one slave might adjust the placement of clay or metal, guiding a companion without words. In kitchens, utensils were passed silently but deliberately, rhythms of movement shared seamlessly. Even labor that seemed solitary was intertwined with observation and cooperation. The steady repetition of tasks created predictability, and within this framework, subtle communication flourished. Bonds were reinforced by experience, shared knowledge, and the rhythm of daily labor. Small joys were discovered in ordinary moments. The warmth of sunlight on the back, the gentle smell of baking bread, or the coolness of water drawn from a well-provided fleeting comfort. A laugh might emerge quietly when a task was completed skillfully, or a soft joke might pass between companions. These moments were brief, almost invisible, yet they offered relief from monotony. Life's small pleasures were integrated seamlessly into work, providing subtle markers of humanity within structured routine. Even minor acts of generosity created meaningful connections. A shared piece of bread, a carefully swept area, or a warm gesture to a companion provided reassurance. These gestures were quiet and often unnoticed, yet they carried weight. Slaves learned to notice each other's needs in small ways, offering subtle support. Over time, these acts created a slow, enduring network of care, reinforcing community and fostering calm resilience. Observation and learning were also communal. More experienced slaves guided newer arrivals through routines, demonstrating subtle techniques or providing silent advice. This was a form of mentorship, a quiet transmission of knowledge. It reinforced both practical skill and social cohesion. Through repetition, collaboration, and careful observation, slaves maintained the smooth operation of the household while creating an environment of mutual support. Even play and small rituals contributed to social cohesion. During brief pauses, some slaves might roll small objects across the courtyard, quietly hum songs, or create simple games to pass time. These were subtle, fleeting, and often performed in whispered secrecy, yet they brought moments of joy, creativity, and relief. Life continued to move slowly, but these small pleasures added texture, reinforcing endurance and camaraderie amidst the repetitive demands of labor. Evenings were particularly important for social interaction. After work, slaves gathered quietly to share stories, reflect on the day, or observe each other's subtle gestures. Conversation was soft and measured, often limited to practical matters or small observations, yet it reinforced human connection. In these moments, bonds deepened, and the rhythm of life became more than the sum of work tasks. Shared experience created emotional continuity, grounding the household in calm companionship. Sleep remained the ultimate sanctuary, but even here, social bonds persisted. Sleeping in shared rooms or close quarters allowed silent observation, awareness of breathing patterns, and mutual reassurance. The physical presence of companions offered comfort, reducing anxiety and fostering a sense of belonging. Dreams intertwined with waking observations, reinforcing both imagination and memory. Nighttime became a slow, gentle space in which both reflection and connection persisted. Even small strategies for survival created quiet resilience. Slaves might carefully ration energy, adjust their pace, or preserve physical strength for essential tasks. Mental strategies included observation, reflection, and subtle negotiation of authority. These small adaptations allowed the household to function smoothly while maintaining personal endurance. Life moved predictably, slowly, but these strategies ensured survival and subtle well-being within the constraints imposed by others. Through centuries, these rhythms persisted. Work, observation, subtle communication, shared gestures, and private reflection combined to create a slow, enduring cycle. Slaves experienced fleeting joys, quiet resilience, and minor agency within repetitive labor. Life moved gently, steadily, and meditatively, shaped by small acts of connection and enduring patterns of community. The pulse of daily existence flowed predictably, but within it, human presence persisted, quietly, patiently, and subtly. And so, day after day, Roman slaves lived in slow, steady rhythm. Work intertwined with connection, observation with reflection, and repetition with subtle pleasure. Even within the strictest structures of authority, human bonds endured. Life passed gently, persistently, and meditatively, carrying small joys, private strategies, and communal resilience through the slow cadence of existence. The rhythm of daily life was continuous, comforting in its repetition, and steady in its quiet endurance. As years passed, the daily rhythm of a Roman slave's life settled into something familiar, almost predictable. The same tasks returned each morning, the same spaces were crossed, and the same sounds marked the hours. With time, this repetition shaped the inner world as much as the outer one. What once felt heavy and unfamiliar slowly became known, and in that knowing, a quiet form of adaptation took root. Life did not become easier, but it became understandable, and understanding brought calm. Private reflection became a companion to routine. While hands worked, the mind wandered gently. Slaves learned to think in slow patterns, revisiting memories, replaying small conversations, or observing subtle changes in their surroundings. Reflection was not dramatic or emotional. It was steady and patient. It allowed the mind to remain active without resistance, flowing alongside labor rather than against it. In this way, thought became a quiet refuge within repetition. Time itself was experienced differently. Days blended into one another, marked less by dates and more by sensations: the warmth of summer stone, the cool air of winter mornings, the lengthening and shortening of shadows. Years were measured in subtle shifts: a new overseer, a change in routine, the aging of companions. Life moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, and this slow passage softened sharp emotions, replacing urgency with endurance. Emotional survival depended on balance. Slaves learned not to cling too tightly to hope, nor to surrender fully to despair. Instead, they occupied a middle space, steady, patient, observant. Joy, when it appeared, was accepted quietly. Sorrow, when it came, was carried gently, without display. This emotional moderation preserved inner stability, allowing life to continue without overwhelming the senses. Long-term adaptation also shaped identity. Over time, slaves came to define themselves not only by their past, but by their role within the household. Skills were refined, routines perfected, and familiarity bred a quiet confidence. This was not freedom, but it was competence. Knowing how to perform tasks well brought a sense of purpose, even within limitation. The body remembered movements, and the mind trusted its own experience. Memory softened with age. Sharp recollections of early loss or capture gradually blurred, replaced by impressions rather than details. Faces faded, names became distant, but feelings remained. These memories surfaced quietly during moments of stillness, often without pain. They were part of the internal landscape, integrated into the flow of thought rather than standing apart from it. Relationships also evolved with time. Companions aged together, sharing years of labor and silence. Some were lost, others arrived. Bonds deepened through shared endurance rather than conversation. Trust was built slowly, through consistency and presence. These long-term connections offered emotional grounding, reinforcing a sense of belonging within the household's steady rhythm. Even authority became familiar. Orders were anticipated before they were spoken. Expectations were understood without explanation. This predictability reduced tension and allowed life to move more smoothly. While power remained unequal, familiarity dulled fear. The household became a known environment, its rhythms internalized, its demands expected rather than shocking. At night, reflection deepened. Sleep came more easily to those who had learned the rhythm of their days. Dreams grew quieter, less vivid, more reflective. Rest became restorative rather than restless. The body, accustomed to repetition, settled into sleep with ease, and the mind followed gently, drifting through calm, unbroken rest. Years continued to pass in this way, slowly, quietly, without dramatic turning points. Life was not defined by sudden change, but by gradual adaptation. Endurance became habit, patience became second nature. Within the steady cadence of daily existence, emotional balance was preserved, allowing individuals to continue without fracture or collapse. Through this long passage of time, Roman slaves lived lives that rarely changed but never truly stopped moving. Each day flowed into the next, shaped by routine, reflection, and quiet resilience. The rhythm was slow, continuous, and enduring, carrying individuals forward through years of repetition, adaptation, and calm persistence. And so, life continued measured in seasons rather than moments, shaped by endurance rather than ambition. In this slow unfolding of time, private reflection, emotional balance, and steady adaptation formed the foundation of survival, allowing life to move forward gently, patiently, and without urgency, sustained by the quiet strength of routine. As time continued its steady movement, the signs of aging became part of daily life. Muscles no longer moved as quickly, joints stiffened in the morning, and tasks required more deliberate effort. These changes were gradual, almost unnoticeable at first. A slower step, a longer pause between actions, a preference for familiar tasks, each sign marked the quiet passage of years. Aging was not announced, it simply arrived, woven into the rhythm of routine. With age often came a shift in responsibility. Older slaves were sometimes assigned lighter duties, drawing on experience rather than strength, supervising smaller tasks, maintaining order in familiar spaces, or teaching younger companions became part of their role. This transition offered a different kind of presence within the household. Knowledge replaced speed. Observation replaced exertion. The rhythm of life adjusted gently, allowing endurance to continue in a new form. Loss also became a frequent companion. Companions who had worked side by side for years might be sold, reassigned, or simply disappear from daily life. Some passed away quietly. Their absence felt more deeply than their presence had ever been spoken of. Loss was acknowledged silently through a pause in routine, a remembered gesture, or an empty space in shared quarters. Grief was carried inward, folded carefully into daily life without disruption. Memory gained weight in these later years. Long past experiences surfaced more often, sometimes unexpectedly. Early days of captivity, distant homelands, or youthful strength returned in fragments. These memories were no longer sharp or painful. They were soft, almost comforting. Reflection became deeper, less restless. Time seemed to move even more slowly, as if the world itself had learned patience. Relationships changed as well. Older slaves were often regarded with quiet respect by younger companions. Their familiarity with routine, their calm demeanor, and their steady presence offered reassurance. Advice was given sparingly, often without words. A simple demonstration or a knowing glance was enough. These relationships were built on continuity rather than emotion, providing stability within the household's ongoing rhythm. The body adapted to limitations. Movements became economical, energy conserved carefully. Slaves learned to listen to their bodies, pacing themselves through tasks. Pain was acknowledged, but not dramatized. It became another sensation, part of the daily experience. Through adaptation, the body remained functional, carrying the individual gently through each day. Sleep also changed with age. Rest came more frequently, but in shorter stretches. Nights were marked by waking and drifting back into sleep, accompanied by quiet thoughts and gentle memories. Dreams were less vivid, more reflective. Sleep remained a refuge, offering moments of calm and restoration, even as the body required more care and patience. Authority remained present, but felt different. Familiarity reduced fear. Expectations were known, routines established. The household's demands no longer surprised or unsettled. Life continued with minimal resistance. Acceptance, rather than hope or despair, defined these later years. This acceptance was not surrender, but understanding, a recognition of the rhythm that had carried life forward for so long. As years accumulated, the future held fewer unknowns. Each day resembled the last, and this predictability brought calm. There was no anticipation of dramatic change, only the steady continuation of routine. Life narrowed gently, focusing on immediate sensations and familiar tasks. The world became smaller, but also quieter. Even in these later years, moments of quiet connection persisted. A shared silence, a gentle acknowledgement, or a small act of kindness reinforced belonging. These moments required no explanation. They were understood, accepted, and valued. In this way, life remained communal, even as individual strength faded. Time continued to pass without urgency. Seasons turned, faces changed. The household endured. For aging slaves, life was defined not by milestones, but by continuity. Each day was complete in itself, requiring no comparison to the past or projection into the future. And so, the later years unfolded slowly, marked by adaptation, memory, and quiet acceptance. Aging did not end life's rhythm. It softened it. The steady pulse of daily existence continued, carrying individuals gently through time. In the calm repetition of routine, life found its own enduring balance, moving forward without hurry, guided by patience, familiarity, and quiet resilience. In the final phase of life, days became simpler. Tasks were fewer, movements slower, and expectations gently reduced. The body no longer rushed to meet the rhythm of the household. Instead, it moved alongside it, unhurried and careful. Each morning arrived softly, marked by familiar sounds and sensations. There was no sense of urgency anymore, only continuation. Life had become a steady presence rather than a struggle against time. Awareness turned inward. Small details gained importance: the warmth of sunlight on stone, the sound of water being poured, the quiet footsteps passing nearby. These sensations anchored the present moment. Thoughts no longer wandered far into the future. Reflection focused on what was immediately felt and observed. The mind rested where the body rested, calm and attentive, without expectation. Speech grew minimal. Silence became comfortable. Words were no longer necessary to communicate understanding. A glance, a pause, or a familiar movement carried meaning. Companions recognized this quiet state and adjusted their behavior naturally, offering space and gentle respect. Life slowed not because it ended suddenly, but because it had already given what it could. Memory lingered softly. Past experiences surfaced without force, like distant echoes rather than sharp images. The mind no longer tried to hold on to them. They came and went freely, blending into the present. Identity was no longer tied to beginnings or losses, but to continuity, the simple fact of having lived through many seasons, many days, many repetitions. The household continued as it always had. New faces appeared, routines remained unchanged, and time moved forward without pause. Life did not stop for any one person. This was understood without bitterness. The rhythm of the world was larger than any individual, and acceptance of this truth brought peace rather than fear. Physical rest became more frequent. Sitting quietly, observing, or lying down during the day became natural. Sleep arrived easily, without resistance. The body no longer demanded effort. It accepted stillness. Breathing slowed. Thoughts softened. Awareness drifted gently between waking and rest, without clear boundaries. There was no dramatic ending, no announcement, no final moment that stood apart. Life simply became quieter, then still. Presence faded gently, like the lowering of a lamp at night. The household adjusted without disruption. Tasks were reassigned. Space was reused. Routine continued. What remained was not a name or a story written down, but traces knowledge passed on, habits demonstrated, rhythms maintained, skills taught to younger hands lived on. Calm behavior modeled in silence shaped others without recognition. Legacy existed not in memory, but in continuity. History rarely recorded these lives. No monuments were raised. No words preserved their experiences. Yet they existed in every stone floor worn smooth, every routine perfected through repetition, every quiet system that endured for generations. Their lives were absorbed into the structure of daily existence, inseparable from the world they supported. Time moved forward. Empires shifted. Centuries passed. But the slow rhythm of ordinary life work, rest, observation, the quiet persistence of those who lived without recognition shaped history more deeply than events ever could. And so, the The story does not end with a conclusion, but with stillness, a steady breath, a final rest, life flowing onward, unchanged, carrying forward the unnoticed presence of countless individuals whose days were slow, repetitive, and real. Their existence faded gently into time, not forgotten, but woven permanently into the fabric of history's quiet foundation.